Blood trickled down Caroline Ashford's forehead onto the cold concrete of the parking garage. The 34-year-old billionaire lay perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing shallow. She was completely conscious. The Mercedes had barely grazed the pillar. A minor collision, nothing more. But when footsteps echoed toward her in the empty basement, she made a decision. She wanted to know. When employees think the boss might be dying, do they call for help, or do they call the press? The single dad who knelt beside her was someone she had never bothered to learn the name of, just another invisible assistant in her empire. He didn't reach for his phone to take photos. He didn't panic. Instead, his hands moved with a precision that didn't belong to an office worker, checking her pulse, stabilizing her neck. Then he began to speak, softly, as if she could hear every word. What he said next would shatter everything she believed about herself and reveal a secret 16 years in the making. The fluorescent lights of the underground parking garage hummed their cold, indifferent song. Caroline Ashford had parked in the same spot for 3 years, the corner space on level B2, closest to the private elevator that would carry her directly to the penthouse office of Ashford Development Corporation. She never took the main entrance, never walked through the lobby where employees might approach her with small talk or nervous smiles. The private route was efficient, clean, safe from the exhausting performance of being Caroline Ashford, youngest CEO in the company's 40-year history, the woman whose face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like Ice Queen of Real Estate and the billion-dollar heiress who never smiles. This Monday morning had been particularly brutal. The board meeting had stretched 3 hours longer than scheduled, filled with thinly veiled threats from shareholders who smelled blood in the water. Her father had been dead for exactly 1 year, and the vultures were circling. They questioned her decisions, her vision, her right to sit in the chair that Harold Ashford had occupied for 4 decades. One board member, a man who had golfed with her father every Sunday, had actually suggested she consider stepping back to let someone with more seasoning take the helm. She had smiled her frozen smile, the one that revealed nothing, and reminded him that she owned 51% of the company. The meeting ended shortly after. Now, descending into the parking garage, Caroline felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had become her constant companion since her father's funeral. The grief she couldn't show, the loneliness she couldn't admit, the crushing weight of an empire she never asked to inherit. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she approached the Mercedes, her mind already racing through tomorrow's meetings, next week's acquisitions, next month's quarterly reports. She didn't notice the stray cat until it darted directly into her path. Instinct took over. She yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The Mercedes clipped the concrete pillar with a sound like thunder in the enclosed space. The airbag didn't deploy. The impact wasn't severe enough. But Caroline's head snapped forward, her forehead catching the edge of the steering wheel. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. She tasted copper, felt something warm sliding down her temple. For a moment, she simply sat there, hands trembling on the wheel, heart pounding against her ribs. She was fine. Shaken, bleeding slightly, but fine. The car would need repairs. Her head would need a bandage. Nothing more. Then she heard them. Footsteps, quick and purposeful, echoing through the empty garage. Someone was coming. In that split second, a thought crystallized in Caroline's mind with perfect clarity. She had spent the past year watching people, watching how they changed when they thought she wasn't looking, the sympathetic smiles that vanished the moment she turned away, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone was performing. She closed her eyes, slowed her breathing, let her body go limp against the seat. She would play dead, or at least unconscious, and finally see the truth. When people thought the billionaire couldn't hear them, what would they really do? The car door opened with a soft click. Caroline kept her breathing shallow, her face slack, her eyes closed. She waited for the obvious responses, the gasp of recognition, the fumbling for a phone, the excited voice calling someone to report that Caroline Ashford was unconscious in the parking garage. She had seen it before. When her father collapsed at a charity gala 2 years ago, someone had live-streamed the whole thing before calling an ambulance. The video went viral. Her father had laughed about it later, but Caroline never forgot the lesson. In crisis, people reveal who they really are. The man who knelt beside her didn't reach for his phone. She could hear him breathing, steady, controlled. She felt fingers press against her neck, checking her pulse with practiced precision. Then those same hands moved to stabilize her head, supporting her neck in a way that spoke of training, not panic. His movements were methodical, professional, wrong for an office worker. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm. "Miss Ashford, my name is Derek. I'm going to check your injuries. If you can hear me, try not to move." She didn't move, didn't respond. But something in her chest shifted, a crack in the ice she hadn't felt in years. He continued his examination with quiet efficiency, his fingers gentle as they assessed the cut on her forehead. Caroline could smell him now, something clean, like laundry detergent, and underneath it, something unexpectedly sweet. Cookies, she realized. He smelled like fresh baked cookies. The absurdity of it almost made her open her eyes. Almost. She heard him pull out his phone, heard the 3 tones of a 911 call. His voice remained steady as he spoke to the dispatcher. "I have a 34-year-old female, conscious breathing, minor head laceration, possible concussion. Vehicle impact at low speed. Patient is responsive to stimuli but nonverbal. I've stabilized the cervical spine as a precaution. Yes, I have medical training, former EMT. Basement level 2, Ashford Tower. I'll stay with her. Former EMT." That explained the hands. Caroline filed the information away, still feigning unconsciousness, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Surely now he would call someone else, a news outlet, a colleague who might pay for the story, a lawyer who specialized in workplace accidents. The phone would come out again, camera pointed at her face, capturing the great Caroline Ashford in her moment of weakness. But the phone didn't come out again. Instead, she heard the rustle of fabric, felt something warm settle over her body. His jacket, she realized, draped carefully across her torso and arms. Then he sat down beside her, right there on the cold concrete floor. He was quiet for a long moment. Caroline could hear his breathing, steady and unhurried. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer now, more intimate, as if he were talking to someone who might actually be listening. "Miss Ashford, I don't know if you can hear me. The doctors say that people who are unconscious can sometimes still hear what's happening around them. So I'm going to talk to you, if that's okay. I think maybe neither of us should be alone right now." Caroline's heart stuttered. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for gentleness. "I'm going to tell you about my daughter," Derek continued, his voice carrying the particular warmth that parents reserve for their children. "Her name is Rosie. She's 7 years old, and she's the reason I get up every morning. The reason I work in a job where nobody knows my name, where I file papers and fetch coffee and pretend I don't have a master's degree in emergency medicine. Because Rosie needs me home by 6 o'clock for dinner. She needs me there when she wakes up from nightmares. She needs a father who's present, not one who's working 70-hour weeks in an emergency room." He paused, and Caroline heard him shift position on the concrete. "Her mother died when Rosie was 8 months old. Cancer. Beth, that was my wife. She found out she was pregnant, and found out she had stage 4 breast cancer in the same week. The doctors told her she had to choose, treatment or the baby. She couldn't do both." Caroline felt something dangerous happening inside her chest, something thawing. She had built her wall so carefully, so deliberately, brick by brick over years of being watched and judged and found wanting. But this man sitting beside her in a parking garage, talking about his dead wife and his living daughter, as if Caroline were someone who might understand. He was dismantling those walls without even trying. When his hand moved to check her pulse again, his fingers brushed against hers, warm and steady. It was the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had touched her without wanting something in return. No handshake sealing a deal, no photographer positioning her for a shot. Just a simple, human touch, and it undid her more than all his words combined. Beth chose Rosie, Derek said quietly. She said she'd already lived 32 good years, and our daughter hadn't lived any. She said the math was simple. I said the math was insane. We fought about it. God, we fought. And then she looked at me with those eyes of hers and said, "Derek, I'm going to die either way. But our daughter doesn't have to." So I held her hand through 8 months of pregnancy with no treatment, no chemo, nothing but prenatal vitamins and prayers. Rosie was born on a Tuesday in April. Beth held her for 6 hours, named her after the roses in her grandmother's garden. And then she closed her eyes, and she didn't open them again. Caroline's throat tightened. She thought of her own father, of the last conversation they'd had before his heart gave out. She had been in Tokyo, closing a deal, too busy to answer when he called. The phone had rung 3 times that day, and each time she had pressed ignore. There was always something more urgent. Her father would understand. He left a voicemail she hadn't listened to until after the funeral. Just calling to say, "I love you, sweetheart. And I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there, for all the birthdays and recitals and graduations I missed. I thought I was building something for you, but I think I just built walls. Anyway, call me back when you get a chance. I have something I need to tell you." She never found out what he wanted to tell her. That voicemail was the last time she heard his voice. Derek was still talking, his words wrapping around Caroline like the jacket he'd draped over her body. "After Beth died, I couldn't go back to the ER. I'd spent 10 years saving strangers, and I couldn't save my own wife. Every time I walked into that hospital, I saw her face. Every time I lost a patient, I lost her all over again. So I quit. Took a job pushing papers because it was the only thing I could do that didn't make me want to scream. And you know what? It's enough. It's enough because at 5:30 every day, I walk out of this building and I go home to a little girl who runs to the door yelling, 'Daddy,' like I'm the most important person in the world. And I am. To her, I am." He laughed softly, a sound that held no bitterness, only a kind of weathered peace. "Rosie draws these pictures, family portraits, she calls them. For the longest time, it was just the 2 of us, me and her, holding hands, standing in front of our little apartment. But last week, she drew a new one, 3 people. When I asked her who the 3rd person was, she said, 'That's the sad lady, Daddy, the one you work for.' I said, 'Miss Ashford?' And she nodded very seriously and said, 'She always looks so lonely when I see her on TV. I think she needs a friend. Can we be her friend, Daddy?'" Caroline's eyes were burning behind her closed lids. She thought she might be crying. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried. Derek's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Miss Ashford, I don't know if you can hear me, but I want you to know that my daughter prays for you every night. She's never met you. She only sees you on television, walking past cameras with that look on your face like you're carrying something too heavy to put down. And somehow, this 7-year-old decided that you needed someone in your corner. So every night, right after she prays for her mom in heaven and her goldfish who's getting old, she prays for the sad lady with the pretty hair who runs Daddy's company. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. "I thought you should know that someone sees you, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just you." She heard him shift, heard the rustle of fabric as he reached into his pocket. "She made this for you. Last week. She's been carrying it around in her backpack, waiting for me to find the right moment to give it to you. I guess." He let out a small, sad laugh. "I guess this is as good a moment as any." Caroline couldn't see it, but she could hear him unfolding paper. A drawing, she realized. Rosie's drawing. "It's the three of us," Derek said softly, describing what she couldn't see. "You, me, and Rosie, holding hands. She drew you with a big smile. She said that's how you would look if you weren't so sad anymore." Caroline's tears were flowing freely now, sliding down her temples into her hair. She couldn't stop them, couldn't control this. The man beside her had reached into her chest and found the part of her she'd spent years trying to bury. Derek continued, his voice soft but unwavering. "I see you standing alone on that balcony every evening, looking out at the city like you're searching for something you've lost. Everyone else sees Caroline Ashford, the billionaire, the CEO. But I see someone who walks too fast because she's afraid of what will happen if she stops. Someone who stays in her office until the cleaning crew comes." His voice dropped even lower. "If you wake up, I want you to know that someone sees you, the real you, not the magazine covers. Just you, the woman on the balcony, watching the sunset alone, looking like she's forgotten how to ask for company." Then Derek said something that made her heart stop entirely. 16 years ago I saved my first life. I was just an intern, 22 years old, scared out of my mind. A businessman collapsed on the street. Massive heart attack. Right there on the sidewalk, surrounded by people in expensive suits who just stood there, frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. I dropped everything and ran. Started CPR, kept his heart beating through sheer stubbornness, refused to let him go, even when my arms were burning. Derek paused, and Caroline heard him take a shaky breath. He grabbed my hand before they took him away. This distinguished older man with silver hair and an expensive suit, and he was crying. He said, "My daughter. Tell my daughter I'm sorry. I was never there. I was always working. Tell her I love her. I never found out who he was, never knew if he made it, but I think about him sometimes. I hope he got to tell his daughter himself." Caroline's body had gone rigid. Her mind was racing, spiraling, trying to process what she had just heard. 16 years ago, a businessman with silver hair, a heart attack on the street, a message for his daughter. She knew that story. She had lived that story. Her father had told her about the young man who saved his life, the stranger who appeared out of nowhere, who performed CPR for 12 minutes straight, who vanished into the crowd before anyone could thank him properly. Harold Ashford had spent years trying to find his rescuer, had hired private investigators, placed newspaper ads, even offered a reward. He never found him. And his last wish, written in his will, spoken to Caroline on his deathbed, was for her to continue the search, to find the man who had given him 16 more years. 16 years to reconcile with his daughter. 16 years to teach her everything. 16 years to tell her he loved her, again and again, until she finally believed him. That man was sitting beside her right now, had been working in her building for 3 years, had been invisible to her, just another face in the crowd, while she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on investigators who searched everywhere except the floors below her office. The tears were coming faster now, and Caroline knew she couldn't pretend anymore. Her body betrayed her. A sob escaped her throat, small but unmistakable. Derek noticed immediately. "Miss Ashford, can you hear me? Are you in pain?" His hand moved to her cheek, gentle, checking for response, and his fingers came away wet with her tears. She felt him go still. Understanding dawned slowly. She could almost hear the pieces clicking into place in his mind. You've been awake this whole time." It wasn't a question. Caroline opened her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she looked at another person without her armor, without her frozen smile, or her calculated expressions, or her careful distance. She looked at Derek Callahan, this man who had saved her father's life and had no idea, who had spoken to her with more honesty than anyone had offered her in years, and she saw herself reflected in his steady gaze. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, just a woman who had lost her father and didn't know how to grieve. Just a person who had forgotten how to let anyone in. "You saved my father's life," she whispered. Her voice was raw, broken in ways she hadn't allowed it to be since childhood. 16 years ago. The man with the heart attack. That was my father. Harold Ashford. Derek's face went through a transformation. Confusion, realization, shock, and something else she couldn't name. I didn't." He shook his head slowly. "I never knew who he was. I just did what I was trained to do." Caroline reached up and took his hand. The same hand that had checked her pulse, that had steadied her neck, that had saved her father's life on a random street corner 16 years ago. "He lived because of you. He lived for 16 more years. He walked me down the aisle at my wedding, even though that marriage only lasted 2 years. He taught me everything about running this company. He told me he loved me every single day until the day he died." Her voice broke. "And his last wish, his dying wish, was for me to find you, to thank you. I've been looking for you for a year, and you were here the whole time." Derek was quiet for a long moment. His hand remained in hers, warm and solid and real. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "I didn't save him for thanks. I saved him because that's what you do. You see someone in trouble, you help. That's it. That's the whole thing." He smiled faintly. "But I'm glad. I'm glad he got those 16 years. I'm glad he got to know his daughter." Caroline thought about the life she had built since her father's death. The walls, the distance, the frozen exterior that kept everyone at arm's length. She had inherited an empire and lost herself somewhere inside it, had become so focused on proving she deserved her father's legacy that she'd forgotten what that legacy actually meant. Harold Ashford hadn't built his company to make money. He'd built it to create something lasting, something meaningful, something that would matter after he was gone. And here was Derek Callahan, a man who had saved lives, who had lost his wife, who had walked away from everything to be present for his daughter, reminding her what mattered. Being there, showing up, seeing people for who they really were. The sound of sirens filtered down into the parking garage. The ambulance was arriving. Their strange, intimate bubble was about to burst. Caroline didn't let go of Derek's hand. "After they check me out," she said, "will you stay? I have so much I want to ask you. So much I want to know." Derek studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. A softening, a recognition, maybe, that this wasn't just about the past anymore. "I'll stay," he said. "But I'll need to call my babysitter. Let her know I'll be late." "Your daughter," Caroline said. "Rosie." "Yeah." A smile touched his lips, real and warm and entirely unguarded. "She's going to be very excited when I tell her I actually talked to the sad lady with the pretty hair." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Caroline laughed. It was a rough sound, scraped raw by tears and shock and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'd like to meet her someday, if that's okay. I'd like to thank her for the prayers." The paramedics arrived then, a flurry of professional concern and medical equipment. They checked her vitals, cleaned the cut on her forehead, asked questions she answered on autopilot, while her mind remained fixed on Derek. He stood to the side, giving them room to work, but he didn't leave. He had said he would stay, and he stayed. At the hospital, they sat in the waiting room while doctors reviewed her scans. Derek called his babysitter, explaining that he would be home late. Through the phone, Caroline could hear a child's voice, high and sweet and insistent. "But Daddy, you promised we'd make cookies tonight. You promised." Derek's face softened in a way that made Caroline's chest ache. "I know, sweetheart. But something important came up. How about we make double cookies tomorrow? We'll make some for us, and some for someone special." "Someone special?" The little voice was intrigued. "Who?" Derek glanced at Caroline. Their eyes met. "A new friend," he said quietly. "I think you're going to like her." They talked for hours while waiting for her discharge papers. Derek told her about Beth, how they met in college, how losing her had nearly destroyed him. Caroline told him about her father, the complicated man who had spent his final years trying to make amends. They discovered parallels in their grief. Both had lost someone central to their lives. Both had coped by building walls. Both were still learning how to live in the aftermath. When the doctor finally cleared her to leave, Caroline realized she didn't want the conversation to end, didn't want to go back to her empty penthouse apartment, where no one waited for her, where the silence pressed against her like a physical weight. Derek seemed to sense her hesitation. "Will you be okay, going home alone?" Caroline considered the question, considered the truth. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been alone for a long time. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else." Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. A little girl with wild brown curls and a gap-toothed smile, flour dusted across her nose, holding up a misshapen cookie like a trophy. "This is Rosie," he said. "She asked me this morning if you would like cookies. Apparently, she's been planning to bake some for you ever since she drew that picture." Caroline stared at the photo, at this child she had never met, who had seen her on television and decided she looked sad, who had prayed for her every night, who had somehow, impossibly, reached across the vast distance of wealth and status and anonymity to offer kindness to a stranger. "I would love cookies," Caroline heard herself say. "I can't remember the last time someone baked me cookies." Derek smiled. It was the same smile from the photograph, warm and open and completely without artifice. "Then maybe you should come over for dinner sometime. I should warn you, though. Rosie will ask a lot of questions. She's going through a phase where she wants to know everything about everyone. I think," Caroline said slowly, "that I would like to be asked questions. Real questions. By someone who actually wants to know the answers." 2 weeks later, Caroline stood on the balcony of her office, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. It was the same view she had stared at 1,000 times before, the same skyline, the same golden light, the same ache of loneliness that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. But something was different now. She was different now. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. Derek stepped up beside her and held out a paper cup. "Rosie made me bring this. She said you need something sweet." Caroline took the cup and looked down. A smiley face had been drawn on the lid in what looked like whipped cream, slightly lopsided and already melting. "She did that this morning," Derek said, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "Before I left for work. She's been planning it all week." Caroline smiled. Really smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "Tell her it's perfect." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights begin to flicker on below. Finally, Caroline spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Derek nodded. "Do you ever think about going back? To medicine, I mean. Being a doctor again, Derek was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted. When Rosie's older, maybe. When she doesn't need me home for dinner every night. He glanced at her. Why do you ask? Caroline turned to face him. Because if you ever decide you want to go back, I could help. Not as repayment for saving my father. I know you don't want that. But because... She hesitated, searching for the right words. Because I think you deserve to be seen too. The way you saw me. Derek studied her face in the fading light. Something shifted between them. A recognition, a possibility, a door cracking open that neither of them had expected. You know, he said slowly. Rosie keeps asking when you're coming back for dinner. She wants to teach you her mom's secret cookie recipe. Caroline felt warmth bloom in her chest. What's the secret ingredient? Derek laughed. She won't tell me. Says it's a girl thing. You'll have to come find out for yourself. The following weekend, Caroline received a drawing through the company's internal mail. She opened the envelope in her office, and her breath caught in her throat. Rosie had drawn a new family portrait, 3 figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. A woman with long dark hair and a wide smile. A tall man with kind eyes. And a little girl in the middle, her arms stretched wide to hold them both. At the bottom, in careful letters that showed signs of practice, Rosie had written, Miss Ashford, do you want to have cookies with me and Daddy? Daddy makes the best cookies. Please say yes. Caroline stared at the drawing for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. That evening, she stood outside a modest apartment building in a neighborhood she had never visited. She was holding a bottle of expensive wine, then realized that was ridiculous, and went back to her car to grab the toy she had also brought, a stuffed elephant she'd seen in a shop window and thought looked friendly. She felt nervous, actually nervous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt nervous about anything that wasn't a business deal. The door opened before she could knock. A small girl with wild brown curls stood in the doorway, her face serious with the gravity of an important occasion. Are you the sad lady? Rosie asked solemnly. Caroline crouched down to meet her eyes. I was sad, she said. But I'm feeling better now. Your daddy helped me. Rosie nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Daddy helps everyone. That's his job. Well, not his real job. His real job is boring. But his important job is helping. She reached out and took Caroline's hand with complete confidence. Come on. The cookies are almost ready. I let you lick the spoon, but only one time because we have to save some batter for Daddy. Caroline let herself be led into the small, warm apartment. It smelled like vanilla and chocolate, and something that felt like home. Derek stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel over his shoulder, looking like a completely different person than the invisible assistant she had never noticed for 3 years. Sorry about the mess, he said, smiling. Rosie insisted on decorating for your visit. Caroline looked around at the streamers taped crookedly to the walls, the hand-drawn, Welcome Miss Ashford sign, the table set with mismatched plates. Her throat tightened. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Dinner was chaotic and wonderful. Rosie dominated the conversation with stories about school, her best friend Oliver, and her goldfish. She asked Caroline approximately 47 questions and insisted on performing a dance from ballet class. Caroline answered every question with complete seriousness, applauded the performance, and accepted a second helping of slightly burnt cookies because Rosie had made them special with extra love. After dinner, while Rosie was brushing her teeth, Caroline and Derek stood on the small balcony. It wasn't exactly a scenic view, but the evening air was cool and the stars were starting to appear. Thank you, Caroline said quietly, for today, for everything. Derek turned to look at her. In the dim light, his face was thoughtful, open. You're different than I expected, he said. When I took this job, everyone said you were cold. ruthless, that you didn't care about anyone but yourself. Caroline smiled faintly. I was. I did a very good job of being exactly what everyone expected me to be. And now? She considered the question. Considered the past 2 weeks, how she had started learning the names of her employees, how she had established a scholarship fund in her father's memory, how she had begun to smile at people in the hallway instead of staring straight ahead like they didn't exist. Small changes, tiny cracks in the ice, but it was a start. Now I'm trying something different, she said. I'm trying to be the person my father spent 16 years hoping I could become. The person your daughter somehow already believed I was. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Would you like to come back next week? Rosie's been asking. She wants to teach you how to make her mother's chocolate chip recipe. Apparently, you have to learn the secret ingredient, but she won't tell me what it is. Says it's a girl thing. Caroline felt something bloom in her chest, warm and fragile and terrifying in its newness. I would like that very much. She left that night with a container of cookies, a crayon drawing of the 3 of them holding hands, and something she hadn't possessed in years. Hope. Real, genuine, dangerous hope for something she couldn't yet name but desperately wanted to understand. The following Monday, Caroline walked through the main lobby of Ashford Tower for the first time in years. She said good morning to the security guard by name. She complimented the receptionist's earrings. She took the regular elevator, standing among her employees like she was one of them. People stared. People whispered. But Caroline didn't care anymore about maintaining the illusion of perfection. Perfect was lonely. Perfect was cold. She was done being perfect. She found Derek at his desk, reviewing files with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He looked up when she approached, and his smile was like sunlight after a long winter. Good morning, Miss Ashford. Caroline, she corrected. Please. Caroline. He said her name like it mattered, like she mattered. Rosie wanted me to give you this. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his desk drawer. Another drawing. This one showed the same 3 figures from before. A woman with long hair, a man, and a little girl between them. But something had changed. In this version, all 3 of them were smiling. And underneath, in careful letters that showed signs of practice, Rosie had written, My new family. Caroline stared at the drawing for a long moment. She thought about her father, who had spent his final years trying to build bridges he had neglected for too long. She thought about Derek, who had given up his career to be present for his daughter. And she thought about Rosie, who had seen a sad woman on television and decided to pray for her. Tell Rosie, she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, that I would be honored to be part of her family. Derek reached across the desk and took her hand. I think we were supposed to find each other. 16 years ago, your father asked me to give his daughter a message. I couldn't do it then. But maybe I was meant to deliver it in person. He squeezed her hand gently. He loved you, Caroline. He was sorry for all the time he missed. And he wanted you to know that it's never too late to choose differently. Caroline's tears fell freely now, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of healing, of a future she was finally ready to embrace. Thank you, she whispered, for saving him, for seeing me, for everything. Derek smiled, warm and open. Thank Rosie. She's the one who believed in you first. That evening, Caroline drove to their apartment with a trunk full of grocery bags. She was going to learn how to make chocolate chip cookies with a secret ingredient. She was going to sit at a wobbly kitchen table and listen to a 7-year-old tell stories about her goldfish. She was going to let herself be seen, be known, be loved. And when Rosie opened the door and launched herself into Caroline's arms with a shriek of delight, Caroline held her tight and felt something shift permanently into place. This was what her father had wanted for her. This was home. Some meetings come 16 years late. But perhaps they arrive exactly when they're meant to. When the ice has cracked just enough to let the warmth in. When two people who have learned to live with loss finally discover they don't have to live with it alone. Caroline Ashford had spent her whole life building an empire. But standing in that small apartment, covered in flour, laughing while Derek smiled at her across the kitchen, and Rosie demanded attention with the cheerful tyranny of a beloved child, she realized she had finally found something worth more than all the buildings in the world. She had found her way back to herself. And the door, at last, was wide open. Some meetings come 16 years late, but perhaps they arrive exactly when they're meant to, when the heart is finally ready to receive what it has been searching for all along.